The wind snatched the young woman's words away before she could utter them. A cold rain lashed across her face, making tears impossible to tell from the downpour. She wished she had stayed in bed that morning, but now there was no turning back. The last ferry of the day had left the island 2 hours ago. And now she was stuck there for the night with the reclusive lighthouse keeper who suddenly seemed very creepy. She was alone with him in the little gift shop attached to the base of the lighthouse. The heavy wooden door was locked and bolted, keeping out the wind and the rain, but also whatever else might be out there. The old man's eyes glittered like the lights on the giant Christmas tree outside, except they were colder. "It's just the wind," he said, his voice raspy and surprisingly gentle. "Don't worry, it won't hurt you." But what if it did? What if it was more than just the wind? She wanted to ask, but she didn't. Instead, she pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the raging storm. The waves crashed against the rocks below the lighthouse, and rain poured off the cliffs into the churning water below. The wind moaned, sounding almost like a cry. The young woman wondered how long she'd been standing there, mesmerized by the wild beauty of the storm, when the lighthouse keeper cleared his throat. "You should get some rest," he said. "There's a spare bedroom above the gift shop." Was he offering or telling her that she had to stay there? She turned to him, her gaze locking onto his, and she saw something that made her swallow hard. His eyes weren't just pools of pale blue bottomless depths. There was something behind them, something dark and deep, that seemed to stretch back centuries. His pupils were enormous and empty, like those of a wild animal. It made her wonder what secrets lay hidden within those orbs that had seen so much, experienced so much. He noticed her staring, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You don't believe me about the wind, do you?" he asked. She shook her head slowly, her gaze dropping to his gnarled hands. He reached out and gently took her elbow, guiding her toward the stairs. "Then let me show you." She followed him up the narrow stairs, each step creaking ominously under her weight. The lighthouse was tall and narrow, spiral staircase winding upwards like a giant illuminated pillar of ivory reaching for the sky. At the top, the old man paused, his back to her. "Do you see anything?" he asked. She hesitated, unsure what he meant. Then she looked out the window. At first, she saw only the raging storm, the wind and the rain beating against the glass. But then, as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw something strange. In the distance, beyond the crashing waves and driving rain, she saw a faint flickering of light. It wasn't the steady beam of a ship's lighthouse, nor the twinkling of distant stars. This light pulsed erratically, like a heartbeat in the darkness. She felt a chill crawl up her spine, and she stepped closer to the window, desperate to make sense of what she was seeing. But as she did, the old man placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly strong. "Don't," he whispered, his voice grave. "It's best you don't know." His words sent a shiver down her spine, raising goosebumps on her bare arms. She wanted to ask what he meant, but he turned away, breaking the silence. "I'll bring you some blankets," he said, his voice echoing in the vast space. Before she could respond, he had disappeared down the corridor, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the unsettling sight beyond the window. Wrapped in a thick blanket, she sat on the edge of the bed in the spare room, trying to ignore the strange light that flickered in the distance. Every time she thought she'd managed to push the image out of her mind, it returned, insistent and disturbing. Suddenly, a loud crash from below jolted her from her thoughts. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wanted to call out, to ask what had happened, but her voice caught in her throat. Moments later, the sound of heavy footsteps climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the narrow space. Her breath hitched as the old man entered the room, his face etched with worry. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. She nodded, unable to speak, but her composure crumbled when he approached the window, and his eyes, those bottomless pools of blue, widened in alarm. "Oh God," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Before she could question him, he was at the door, fumbling with the bolts. "We have to get out of here," he said urgently, his eyes never leaving the window. Now. She scrambled out of bed, her bare feet slapping against the cold wooden floor. Together, they raced down the stairs, the old man leading the way, his movements surprisingly swift for someone his age. Outside, the storm had intensified. The wind tore at her clothes, and the rain stung her skin. She huddled deeper into her thin jacket, wishing she'd brought something warmer. They reached the base of the lighthouse, and the old man pulled her toward a heavy iron gate set into the cliff face. It was locked. He rattled the bars, but they were no use. "What are we going to do?" she cried, panic rising in her throat. He looked at her then, his face ashen in the flickering light from the lighthouse beam. "We're going to wait for the morning," he said, his voice grim. "If we can just hold out until the storm passes, we should be safe." But she knew that wasn't true. She looked back at the lighthouse, its beam sweeping across the turbulent sea. And in the distance, she saw the strange flickering light again. It was closer now, pulsing like a beacon in the darkness. She turned to the old man, her eyes wide with fear. "Can't wait here," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "We need to go further below." He understood, and without another word, he led her through a gap in the rocks. They climbed down, the wind screaming in their ears, and soon they were below the lighthouse, hidden in a small cave. The old man built a small fire, and for a moment they were safe in their little haven, the wind and the rain the only witnesses to their fear. But then the ground trembled beneath them. Startled, she clung to the old man as the earth shook violently. Rocks tumbled down from the ceiling, and the fire sputtered, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. When the tremors finally subsided, she looked at the old man, her face pale. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. He shook his head, his eyes filled with a strange light. "It's coming," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "It's finally coming home." As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the darkness, the young woman watched as the old man stumbled out of the cave. His shoulders slumped, his face etched with defeat. He didn't seem to notice the sun, the beautiful burst of golden light that chased away the shadows of the night. He just stood there, staring out at the sea, lost in his own thoughts. Hesitantly, she emerged from the cave herself, blinking against the brightness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky as blue as the ocean stretched out before them. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of waves against the rocks. She looked back at the cave, at the old man who still hadn't moved. "Are you coming?" she asked softly. He turned to her then, his eyes filled with a strange light. "I can't," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm needed here." She frowned, confused by his words. Needed? Needed for what? He took a deep breath, his gaze dropping to the ground. "To guard it," he said finally, gesturing vaguely toward the sea. "To guard what lies beneath." She stared at him, not understanding, when suddenly the ground rumbled beneath their feet. The old man stiffened, his eyes widening in alarm. "It's here," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and fear. He turned to her, his expression desperate. "You have to go," he said, pushing her gently toward the path leading away from the lighthouse. "You don't want to see this." But she didn't move. She wanted to know what was happening, what lay hidden beneath the waves. The old man's face crumpled in anguish. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "For your own sake, go away." As if in answer to his plea, the ground shook again, and this time it was clear what was happening. The sea itself was rising. A gigantic wave, towering over the cliffs, was crashing toward them. She screamed, her voice lost in the roar of the wave, and the world went black. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the beach below the lighthouse. Dazed, she sat up, wincing as pain shot through her head. She looked around. The sea was calm now, the wave having vanished as quickly as it had come. And there, in the shallows, was the old man kneeling beside something large and dark that had been tossed up by the wave. As she watched, he reached out and touched it, his fingers trembling. "What is it?" She whispered, her voice hoarse. He didn't answer. He just kept kneeling there, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. She struggled to her feet and walked toward him, each step taking her closer to the mystery that had brought them both to this moment. As she approached, she saw that what he had been kneeling beside was a large metal box, its surface barnacle encrusted and old. The old man rose to his feet, his eyes filled with an ancient sadness. "It's gone," he whispered, his voice hollow. "It's finally come home, and now it's gone again." She stared at him, at the box, at the churning sea, and realized that the storm, the lighthouse, the old man, it was all connected to this box that had slumbered beneath the waves for so long. She wanted to ask questions, to dig deeper into the mystery that had brought them together. But she knew that this place, this moment, was sacred to the old man, and she didn't want to intrude. So she did the only thing she could think of. She knelt beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and together they watched as the sea ebbed and flowed, carrying with it the secrets of the deep.